In 2013, there was the biggest automotive recall in history. The Takata airbag recall affected over 67 million vehicles. You see, this recall was done because what they found is when the airbags would deploy, there was a chance, a decent chance, that metal shrapnel would be propelled into the cabin of the car, injuring those in the vehicle. This faulty product resulted in 26 confirmed deaths, with over 400 injuries related to this airbag deployment. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who gets a notice that your airbag has been deployed. What are you going to do? Or your airbag has been recalled. What are you going to do? Are you just going to ignore that recall, or are you going to go in and have that taken care of? How many of you are just going to ignore that recall notice? I see no hands being raised. We are in the middle of, or we're at the very end of this sermon series of building your house on the rock. And today I'm going to talk about raising teenagers. And the truth is that this has been a rough week for me. Because in my research on what I wanted to say about raising teenagers, I realized that there is a big recall that we as parents need to do. And so I want to start by saying to all of the parents of current children and teenagers, I am not personally attacking you. This is a problem within our society. This is a deep problem. By the way, the numbers are in. We're going to be looking at a lot of statistics today. The tests have been done, and it is not just our country. It is basically every first world country that has technology. We're going to be talking about technology today and the harms and the dangers that it poses. Also, next thing I want to say is for those of you who have raised teenagers in the digital era, I am not attacking you and what you have done. I also want to make sure that you do not feel guilty because the research was not out at the time. There are a lot of things looking back that I wish my parents had done differently. I'm not attacking my own parents. They did the best they could do with what they knew at the time. That being said, last week we looked at this verse. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. This is the core verse that I want us all to focus on when talking about raising children. That we need to train them. And we talked a lot about that last week, so I'm not going to rehash all of that. But this week I also want to pair this verse with this proverb. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. This is another key verse that we need to look at because we have to ask the question, what is sharpening our children? What is sharpening our teenagers? Maybe the better question is, what is dulling our teenagers right now? I started this journey this week knowing that I wanted to talk about technology because I know the dangers of it firsthand. I know how damaging it can be to a teenage mind, and I know how damaging it still is to me. And I started just as an offhand comment talking with my friend Sam. I said, yeah, this is what I'm preaching on. He said, drop everything you're doing. This was Tuesday afternoon. He said, drop everything you're doing. I'm sending you a podcast that you need to listen to. And he sent me this podcast by, and I can't remember the name of the podcast, but it's one of these guys that works for Dave Ramsey. And he had his friend on who had gone through a 7-week screen fast. Meaning for 7 weeks, he didn't look at any screens. And you may be thinking, how in the world do you pull that off? Here's how he did it. The first 2 weeks, he lived in a monastery. The second 2 weeks, he went and lived with some Amish. And the last 3 weeks, he decided He wanted to spend the last 3 weeks with his wife and kids. And so even though they had their screens in front of them, he stayed away from them. Here's what he found. Before he did the study, he went to LA. He has a buddy who's a doctor, does brain scans. He did a brain scan, did a memory cognition test. In the memory cognition test, he scored in the 51st percentile for men his age. The brain scan showed gray matter on his brain. After his 7-week screen fast, he went back to the same doctor, did the same brain scan, did the same memory cognition test. The doctor told him, you have done years worth of healing on your brain. Significant amount of that gray matter on his brain was now gone. He scored in the 99th percentile in memory cognition. That's amazing. 7 weeks did healing on his brain. In the midst of listening to that podcast, I remembered hearing about this book right here, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I read this book and listened to it because I like audiobooks more than I like reading a page. And as I was partway through, because I got it on Audible, as I was partway through the introduction to this book, I went, I also need a physical copy. So I got on Amazon, ordered a copy, that just fell on the ground, ordered a copy, and it was at my house the next morning. And I literally sat down while listening to the book, reading the book and highlighting important things. A lot of the information that we're going to look at today, a lot of the statistics come straight from this book. This guy is a professor at NYU. He knows what he's talking about. And so here's some of the, and I'm calling these very staggering statistics. First one, major depression among teenagers. Since 2010 in girls has increased by 135%. For boys, it has increased 161% since 2010. He marks 2010 as the important mark of when things started, because in 2007, the very first iPhone was released, but what we know as the App Store, or now the Google Play Store if you have Android, those did not become released until 2009. And so in 2010 is when you started being able to change the apps on your smartphone. You didn't just have access to the internet, you had all these apps that people were creating. That's when social media became extremely fluid and fluent on smartphones. And teenagers, depression skyrocketed. Percentage of U.S. undergrads, so those in college, with mental illness. Anxiety went up 134%, depression went up 106%, ADHD increased by 72%. I'm not going to go through all of these statistics, but all of this has skyrocketed since the smartphone boom. By the way, these next ones are really hard to look at. Emergency room visits for non-fatal self-harm by U.S. teens. For girls, since 2010, has increased 311%. For boys, it's increased 171%. And if that weren't bad enough, this statistic is not just all teenagers, this is teens ages 10 through 14. For teens 15 through 19, for girls it's gone up 92%, for boys it's gone up 57%. Suicide rate has gone up. Again, ages 10 through 14. Ages 15 through 19. I don't think it's an understatement to say that there is a problem. There is a massive problem. And we have to ask the question, why is this happening? Why in the world is this happening to our teenagers? Jonathan Haidt lists 4 major reasons why this is happening to our teenagers. Social deprivation. What he means by this is that connecting to someone through your smartphone is not the same as connecting to someone face to face. And so even though we may have more contact with people, we don't actually have contact. Connecting through your phone is not the same as connecting face to face. Yet so many of our teenagers are spending so much time on their phone. That podcast I mentioned, this guy, a grown adult with a wife and children of his own, he said that what made him start the 7-week social media fast or screen fast was one Sunday afternoon he looked at his phone and he got that screen time update. Any of you get that? Where it tells you how much time you were on your phone throughout the week? And it told him he averaged 7 hours of screen time every day. And he got curious and decided to do the math. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said, that's bad enough in itself, but then once you figure you were asleep for somewhere between 6 to 8 hours, of the time left, he spent more than half of his day on his phone. Half of his awake time he spent on his phone. Sleep deprivation. Dr. Haidt says, get those phones out of your bedroom. I can relate to this. Here's the thing, I also want to be honest, this book was very convicting for me because I am maybe the worst offender. Sleep deprivation. I can't tell you the number of times, especially when Lynn is out of town, that all of a sudden I've laid down in bed at midnight and all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm scrolling on my phone. Sleep deprivation. We know what happens to adults when we don't get enough sleep. We get angry, we get cranky. Teens need even more sleep than we do. And they're sleep deprived. Attention fragmentation. Again, I am maybe the worst offender of them all. Because how many times are we at home watching a movie together as a family, and what am I doing? I'm scrolling on my phone and not watching a movie. And then addiction, and this is the biggest, not the biggest, this is one of the big problems, one of the big 4, is addiction. Because phone addiction is not different than any other addiction. Scrolling on a screen releases dopamine in our brain, which is addicting. Do you know the problem with dopamine? Is to get the same sensation, you need more of it the next time. So the next question is, what can we do? Dr. Haidt, he comes up with 4 of what he calls foundational truths, or 4 new norms that we need to set aside. He says no smartphones before high school. No smartphones before high school. And then he says no social media before 16. By the way, all of those graphs, especially when talking about social media, says social media is actually a whole lot more damaging to our teenage girls than it is to our teenage boys. Because here's the point of social media. I don't know if you know this, but this is the entire point, is to show other people my life is better than your life. Here's what it does to our teenagers, is it tells them that person has a better life than I do. My life sucks because it's not as good as his life or her life. And that starts giving thoughts of suicide and self-harm. And he said it is exponentially worse on our teenage girls. So he says no smartphones, period, until high school at least. Because the most formative years for the teenage mind is 10 to 13 or 14. And then he says no social media before 16. And in fact, he even says there are very valid arguments that would tell you no social media until 18. But he thinks that that is maybe too big of a leap for some people. He says phone-free schools. And he makes a caveat with this. He says you can't enforce this yourself, but he does say you can petition your schools to do this. He talked about a study of some schools that went phone-free, and not just can't have your cell phones in class, but you can leave them locked up in your locker. No, he talked about schools that they had a locker that everyone had to put their phone in, and it got locked, and it didn't get open until the end of the day. And he said that mental illness in that school dropped exponentially, and that their test scores raised exponentially, and that the social interaction between these teenagers became better. And then he talks about more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. He says these are the 4 things that we need to be doing for our children to remove them from the anxiety that comes with the norm of today. These are the things that we need to do. So, but in reality, how do we actually do this? That's the real question. Okay, these are great to know, but how do we actually do this? Here's some suggestions. Limit screen time to 2 hours per day. Limiting, he says, is the number one thing because limiting reduces the addiction significantly. Because if you limit, and then you say, go play outside, again, you're reducing the time they're on that device. He doesn't say, don't let your kids have devices at all. He does say no cell phones until high school. But he does say, hey, screen time is fine in moderation. He says no screens in the bedroom. None at all. There's a couple reasons for this. Number one is that helps reduce the sleep deprivation. But also number 2, he says that one of the problems with American society, with technologically advanced societies, because again, it's not just America, it's all of the developed world, is that we have started over monitoring real life, and we have become he talks about helicopter parenting. He says we've started helicopter parenting, which is actually detrimental to our children's development, because sometimes kids need to play and do things that are risky. Because when you jump off that really high play structure and break your arm, you learn, maybe that was too high. And he says that is actually good for children to learn. Because if you learn that at a young age, you understand it at the older ages as well. He says we have over-parented, over-supervised the real world, but we have under-supervised the digital world. And so one of the things he says, no screens in the bedroom, is that you as a parent should always know what your children are looking at on their tablet, on a phone, on a laptop, on a computer. You should always know. He says no screens at least 30 minutes before bed. He suggests even going farther and saying 60 minutes before bed. And he talks about the blue light, and I didn't look into all of that research. I know my wife has. But blue light is bad for you, especially in getting to sleep. He says increase responsibilities at home. He says even children as young as 8, you can give them some responsibilities such as cooking a meal once a week. Have them plan dinner and then have them put it together. You might have to help them, but give them extra responsibilities because children need responsibilities. And instead what we've done is we've overparented and we've said, oh, no, I can do this. And so our children at the age of 13 or 14 don't even know how to mow the lawn. And our children need to learn how to do that at a young age. I can't tell you the number of people that I ran into in college, and this was before 2010, But I can't tell you the number of people I ran into in college that didn't even know how to do their own laundry. Give your children some responsibility at home. Make them work for it. And guess what? You can also let them have natural consequences for not following through on their responsibilities. If they don't do their laundry, they have to wear dirty underwear to school. And they will learn that lesson. It says decreased supervision. Okay, I talked about this. Decreased supervision in the real world. Let them go to the park on their own. Now, there is an age where that should be appropriate, but think about when you were young. Think about when you were young. And I know the argument you're going to give, but the world's a much scarier place today than it was when I was young. Statistically speaking, that is completely false. Statistically speaking, there are less child abductions in the United States today than there were when I was growing up. And even then, there were less than when you were growing up. The world today is actually statistically safer than it was when we grew up. So let them have a little bit more freedom in the real world. I know that's scary for those of us who are parents. That is scary. It's okay to be scared. And the last thing I have is get them involved with religious activities. Get them involved. Let them do some of these things. Encourage them to do some of these things. Here's one of the really interesting things about this book. Because I'm going to talk about, there's a chapter in this book. Oh, what is the name of the chapter? There's a chapter called, skipped it, Spiritual Elevation and Degradation. Is one of the chapters in this book. Jonathan Haidt is an atheist. He comes out and says it clearly in his book that he is an atheist. But he has an entire chapter in this book talking about spiritual elevation and degradation. And he says that one of the things that smartphones do is they pull us away from religion. And he says that's a bad thing. An atheist said it's a bad thing. So again, anxious generation. Here is another statistic I want you to see, and he talks about this God-shaped hole. And he said, and this statistic of asking seniors in high school, and they give this response, life often seems meaningless. Over 30% of teenage girls and about 22% of teenage boys, seniors in high school, say that life often seems meaningless. And I read this and I thought, man, I should call up some of my teenage boys onto the stage. I'm not going to. And ask them, what is the meaning of life? Because this year we studied through the book of Ecclesiastes. And over and over and over, I didn't hide the end of the book of Ecclesiastes from them. Because over and over, we talked about what is the meaning of life. At the very end of the book of Ecclesiastes, here's what Solomon says. The end of all matter. All has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. End of the book of Ecclesiastes that starts with meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Solomon comes to the conclusion and says, fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. This is the purpose of life. And I'm going to assume that for our teenagers who were in that class, they remember that. Because I tried to hammer it into their head. That this is the purpose of life, is to fear God and keep his commandments. There is a quote that I want to read you from this book. And it's from this section where he talks about this God-shaped hole. And he says there is this God-shaped hole in all of us. And he talks about when that phrase first came out. And it was in an article that this guy wrote. And he talks about this. But in the midst of this, here's what he says. Again, remember, he is an atheist. As many religious friends disagree about the origin of our God-shaped hole, They believe that the hole is there because we are God's creations and we long for our Creator. But although we disagree about its origins, we agree about its implications. There is a hole, and emptiness in us all that we strive to fill. If it doesn't get filled with something noble and elevated, modern society will quickly pump it full of garbage. That has been true since the beginning of the age of mass media. But the garbage pump got 100 times more powerful in the 2010s. The garbage pump being screens and social media. There's a God-shaped hole. If we do not fill it, if we do not get our kids involved, and as I talked about last week, be a good example of showing them what it means to be a Christian, the world will fill that hole. We can't let that happen. We cannot let that happen. So the question becomes, how do we fill that hole? How do we do that? So, just like last week, I'm going to give some practical application. Number one, bring your teens. By the way, I'm saying teens. This also goes to all parents who have children at home. Bring them to Bible class. They are never too young to come to Bible class. I think I said that last week. Bring them to Bible class. Because two important things happen in Bible class at church. Number one, they learn the Word of God in a different way than you are hopefully teaching them at home. Number two, they start to build connections with others, whether it's just the teacher or whether it's other people in the class. Bring them to Bible class. Number two, worship with your teens. I'm not saying they can't sit with their friends during worship, but what I am saying is that sometimes your kids, and again I said teens, but your kids should be sitting with you in worship. They should be watching you worship. That also means during worship, and again, I was one of the biggest offenders of this. Get the phone out of their hands. Your children can worship God with you. They can sit there and they can be quiet during the sermon. You can bring things for them to write on and play on, but keep the screen away during church. Again, I'm not targeting you specifically. This was a shot to me because I did this. I handed my kids my phone and said, here you go. Be quiet during worship. I will never be upset about a child screaming and crying in the middle of worship. Because a church that doesn't have children is a dying church. And I want to hear your children at their best and at their worst here in worship. But they need to see you worship, and if they're on a phone, they can't see you worship because everything else is being pushed out of the way. Send your teens on youth events. We do fun stuff. We are trying to plan a trip to the ape caves. Send your teen to that. We're trying to get it planned. Hopefully it's going to be that week of the 4th of July. Somewhere in that week, I'll have information up. Send them. It doesn't always have to be a spiritual activity. Because just building that relationship and putting the phone away for a while is good. Send your teens and your kids to camp. I don't know if you know this, but even before I got here, this church has been very blessed and has been, in my opinion, very right on what they do. There is a cost for camp. We are a partnering congregation, which means we pay less than someone who just applies through the camp website and sends in their registration to the camp website. We pay less. But then on top of that, our elders have put together a fund that the church here, because we believe so much in the good things that happen at camp, the church pays for half of the rest of the fee. And so you end up only paying for half of what your child costs to go to camp. Send your teens and your kids to camp. There is great things that happen. Even above, don't get me wrong, the spiritual aspect is number one, but even beyond that, there is friendships that are made at camp. There's no cell phone reception. In fact, at high school camp, thank you for that. One of the great things that we do at high school camp, because even if there's no reception, hey, there are games on my phone that I can play without internet. But one of the great things that we do at high school camp, and they've started doing this at junior high camp as well, is on registration day, we collect all the cell phones. We put them in Ziploc bags, we write the name of the camper on it, and we lock them up for the week. And here's what we found. The first year we did this, we had one parent get upset with us. All the other parents were like, this is great, good idea. We had one teenager break down in tears. That first week that we did that, my friend Kendra, she was in charge of the medical stuff that week. Monday, Tuesday, and Tuesday, she was inundated with teens coming in with headaches. Even though they said, oh, I've drunk a lot of water, but they had headaches because they were going through withdrawal symptoms. By Wednesday, those teens who had come in every single day, by Wednesday afternoon, she didn't see them again. It is great to send your teens to camp just for getting away from screens for a while. But get them involved in church. Get them connected to the church. I already mentioned Bible class. I already mentioned teen stuff. But when we have work days, bring your teens. Bring your children. Let them work along other people in the church. Think back to when you were growing up in church, if you grew up in the church. Did you come to work days with your mom and dad? Did you do work around the church building with older people in the congregation? I bet you did. I remember some of those growing up. It's building relationships. Serve together. I mentioned that last week. Serve together. So what will you do? In one of his chapters in this book, Jonathan Haidt, he talks about the cuckoo bird. Do you know about the cuckoo bird? What the cuckoo bird does is it lays its eggs in other nests. And then when that cuckoo bird hatches, because it hatches before most other birds, it kicks all the other eggs out of the nest in order to consume all of the food that the unsuspecting mother brings back for her baby chicks. So that cuckoo bird gets everything. And that's exactly what screens and social media are doing to our teenagers. So what will you do? Truth is, some of us might have to make some significant changes. We might have to do a total recall and say, I know that I've already given you a cell phone and you're in 6th grade. I'm taking it away now. I know you have social media right now and you're only 13, which by the way, 13 is the required age for someone to sign up for social media. And I say, I know you're 13 and I've let you have social media, but we're going to take that away now. Because your mental health is more important than you being happy with me. We might have to do that. In fact, I would argue we should be doing that. We need to be doing that. Over the last couple months, I've been working on this document, and I know you're not going to be able to read it at all, but this is our family technology agreement that we went over with our children last night. And these are some points that I decided I think these are important. These are things that are important. And in here, there are things like, I understand that media and technology is a privilege, not a right. And I understand that how I treat my families and others is more important than my screen time. And I cannot add or delete apps without permission. And I can't add people to my contact list without permission. And I understand that I'm not allowed to have a screen in my bedroom unless I've been given permission. And things like, I understand, and this is a big one, I understand that my parents can read through my text messages anytime they want to, even without giving me prior notice. We should be monitoring what our children are saying to each other. My son knows. He has an Apple Watch, and that's the only device that he has where he can message other people. And he knows that I go on and read his text messages. He doesn't know when I do that. Well, he does. He knows that I do that after he goes to bed at night, but he doesn't know how often I do that. Sometimes it's every day. I grab his watch and read through his text messages. Sometimes it's once a week. He doesn't know. He doesn't even know when I've done it. But we have to know what our children are saying to others their age. or to what they're messaging back and forth. And the reason I bring this up is because I think that we need to set expectations for our teenagers so they know. Also, one of these things on here, and I think it's the second one, I understand that all technology in the house belongs to my parents. They let me use it. That is not your teenager's phone. That is not your teenager's smartwatch. That is yours that you are allowing them to use as a privilege, not a right. I think we need to do things like this because we need to be setting the example. Last week we looked at this verse. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And I bring this up again because we need to be sharpening our children. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. We need to be the iron that is sharpening our children and our teenagers. And we need to eliminate some of the things that are dulling them. But here's another key, and again, I have failed at this more times than I would like to admit. We need to be good examples for our teens. We need to be putting down the phones and spending times with our teenagers and with our children. We need to be the good example. Again, I fail at this so often. And reading this book this week and going through this research, I realized how terrible I have been, and I deleted Facebook from my phone. If I want to go on Facebook, I need to pull out my laptop, and I can do it there, but I deleted it from my phone. And I deleted most of the games from my phone. And I was deeply convicted, and my wife, it's probably driving her crazy because she's been telling me this for years, that I am on my phone too much. But isn't it funny how someone can tell you something over and over and over, but it's not until you come to the conclusion yourself that you're like, I need to make some changes? And so I deleted a lot of that garbage from my phone. And I made a commitment to myself that I need to be more present in my teenager's life and in my daughter's life. I need to be more present. I need to put the phone down and spend some time with them. Because one of the worst things about us having these is the message that we are unconsciously telling our children, which is, hold on, the thing I'm doing here is more important than you are. And I failed at that so often. And we need to do better because we need to be that good example for our children. I would encourage all of you, whether you have children in the house or not, go pick up this book. Read it. Because I gave just a glimpse today of what Dr. Haidt says in his book. It was terrifying. But it's important to know. It's important to understand. And it's important to put some things into practice and to change some of the things that we're doing. Because we have to be that good example for our children. Because we, as their parents, are responsible for their relationship with God. And if we are telling them that our phone is more important, they're not going to care about anything else we tell them. We have to be that good example. It's hard. It's very hard. Because our phones, our screens, they are addicting. But we need to be better. I need to be better. We have to do it for the spiritual health of our children, spiritual health of our teenagers. We have to do better. Again, this is not an easy thing to do, but we have been blessed with a wonderful community, and we can do this together. If you need the help of the church, if you need our prayers in any ways, please come as we stand and sing.